Welcome to the Braver Angels book club discussion of American Covenant by Yuval Levin. I'm Lee Anderson, organizer of the Braver Angels Library and Book Club, and co-chair of the Houston area Braver Angels Alliance. I'll introduce our team for the discussion tonight. Please wave when I call your name so everyone can recognize you. You'll be hearing from Barbara Reagan, co-chair of the New Mexico Alliance,
and it is Regan, Barbara Regan.
Regan, sorry, and Luke Nathan Phillips, who will be leading the discussion. Luke is a writer whose policy work has been published in prominent outlets and has served as Publius Fellow for Braver Angels. Other team members who helped organize this are Marty Gerber, who's not here tonight, Mike Shaver, Lynn Mallory, Dan Hardy, and Dennis Lover, and Eric Strickler. So for some of you, this may be your first experience with Braver Angels. We hope tonight inspires you to learn more about our mission and get involved. Braver Angels works to bring Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. We are the nation's largest grassroots organization dedicated to bringing together conservatives, liberals, and others on equal terms. Our goal is to understand our differences, find common ground where possible, and help the country we all love find a better way forward. Tonight's program will last about 1 hour. We will present a series of prepared questions and invite responses from the audience. In our discussion, we will follow core principles we call the Braver Angels Way. We state our views freely and fully without fear. All views are welcome, and we will treat each other with respect. We're not here to convince anyone or change minds, but to learn from each other. At the end of the program, we'll set aside a few minutes for network time for exchanging contact information if you'd like to follow up with someone about something you heard in the meeting. And then during the conversation, we'll follow some protocols to make it work better. Please keep your comments brief so that as many people can participate as possible. We may not have time to hear from everyone, and we apologize in advance if we don't get to your input. Please keep yourself muted unless you are speaking to eliminate distractions, and use your Zoom hand to indicate you wish to speak. The Zoom hand is the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or behind the 3 dots menu if you're on a tablet. Now, the choice for Yuval Levin's book, American Covenant, was proposed by Barbara Regan. And to begin our program, I'd like to turn it over to Barbara to share why she believes this book is an important choice for our discussions. Barbara?
Thank you, Lee. And thank you to the members of the library team, Alliance members who've helped organize this. Welcome to our audience. Thank you for being here. I'm really looking forward to a great discussion. My initial thought for this book discussion was to host it as an event in our local alliance. I had one question from my reading that I really wanted to discuss with a couple of people I know in our alliance. I think of them as constitutional scholars, but I needed help formulating other questions. So some of our alliance members, when I asked, they suggested some questions. And then I reached out to the library team. The library team was willing to host it nationally, so that's why all of you out there have been able to join us, and it's even bigger than we envisioned. So to explain why I suggested this book, I'm going to share this burning question that I had from my reading. I'm a conservative. I'm actually the Red co-chair of the New Mexico Alliance. I'm a conservative until I read Yuval's books, though. I hadn't really given much thought to our Constitution and how it's impacted the way that our government works. I kind of vaguely knew it wasn't supposed to be a partisan document, but I know it's turned out that way in the sense that one of the values, when you look at, what distinguishes left from right, one of the values on those two sides, they hold differing views on this important document called the Constitution. Now, in our alliance, some of the members I've gotten to know, they're very knowledgeable about the Constitution. And I know a couple in particular, and they approach it from opposite sides of the political divide. Now, I knew Yuval Levin. I'd read some of his other books, and I know he's a well-known conservative writer. So I was aware my conservative bias, when I read the book, it was going to make it hard for me to do anything other than just totally agree with everything in his perspective and everything he says in the book. So in his introduction, he actually states very clearly there that he's going to take a side in the controversies surrounding the Constitution. He accepts that some readers will contest and disagree with the approach that he takes and with particular judgments and views that he presents. So here's my opening question, opening to anyone in the audience. Did you find a view or a perspective that was presented by Yuval that you felt was closer to the truth about how our Constitution should or should not be used to govern our nation? In other words, something Yuval claims that you felt you couldn't agree with. So that's
What I'd like, go ahead. Barbara, did you finish? I'm sorry.
yes.
I'll call on people to who wants to respond to that. Lynn, I noticed you have your hand up. Did you mean to respond, or did you have something else you wanted to say? You're muted, by the way.
Myself? Oh, I can. Good. I thought you were muting all of us. So quickly, the one thing, and I may be conflating things in the book, some specific language in the book with things that I listen to, podcasts and a video of a talk he gave. But the one thing that I really disagreed with was the concept of originalism in interpreting the Constitution. And actually a lot of other stuff I did agree with, but that was the one thing that I couldn't really swallow whole, at least.
Thank you. Did someone else want to address Barbara's question? If so, hold up your Zoom hand. Okay, if not, we can
Hello,
turn it over.
could I respond?
Yes, who's speaking?
This is Michael. I'm the anonymous no picture guy.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
I was just gonna see if Lynn could elaborate as to why she thinks that the original intent of the language is a problem.
Yes, I guess I'm still unmuted, huh? Because just simply because of the huge changes since the time that the Constitution was written. I mean, just for instance, apparently everybody was male, so some of those things I think just can't relate to the world we live in today, in the kind of extreme sense of originalism that many people, I think, are interpreting it as.
Would you be able to give an example that comes to mind?
Oh, golly, right off, I can't think of. Well, in general, I would want to talk about this a little more deeply, but I think the right to bear arms. Nobody could anticipate the kinds of weapons we have today.
Let
And,
me, I'm sorry.
okay, well, that's,
Okay, finish. Okay,
that's
okay. Let me ask Mac Lewis. You want to unmute yourself and comment on that question?
Yeah, I don't recall that he made a big statement in the terms of originalism. He certainly structured the Madisonian approach of three separate parts of the government and the intent to have debate and collaboration or collaboration within the Congress. And he contrasted with what he called the Wilsonian approach of sort of a party-oriented approach where the leader of the party, when they win an election, feel they have a mandate to proceed. And Wilson thought that was a better way to deal with a more rapidly moving society after the Industrial Revolution, when we're no longer farmers, and so on and so forth. So he was strongly commenting on the value of the Madisonian approach, the debate and compromise, and how that might allow us to listen to each other better rather than the Wilsonian approach of thinking that one party has the answer and if they've got the votes, just shove it through. So in that sense, he's using the term Madisonian, as I recall, to talk about the original intent of the Constitution. And I think that was the major theme of the book, which is if we did that, there'd be more debate, compromise, we'd be listening to each other better. And that could change reduce the polarization in our society. So if, in that sense, from an originalism point of view, I think he was making the point that the Madisonian approach of encouraging separation of the Congress from the president and the Supreme Court and encouraging debate and compromise was a major point of his book, and one I thought was exciting. I think it was a good point. I don't know how you get there from here, but
if I could just,
Lynn, let me go ahead and turn it over to Luke. We have a number of questions to go through, and we can come back to this. There'll be an open session at the end where we can come back and revisit some of these questions. So Luke, you want to go ahead and kick it off?
Yes, please. Thank you, Lay, and thanks for having me, book club team. Everybody, I'm Luke. I have done some facilitation, and if it is okay with all of you, I would like to just go by one very quick rule on this. I would prefer if we do this as a no crosstalk session. And crosstalk in this will be defined by people talking directly to each other. If you can say your statements to the body or to me, that will make it somewhat easier to get this conversation moving quickly so that everybody who wants to speak can have a fair amount of time to speak. And the reason we do that is because crosstalk will tend to take some more time than lets that happen. So there's just that. Meantime, we have a bunch of preliminary questions set up, and so we're going to go through these. If you want to give an answer, and I would very strongly encourage you to give an answer for maybe 90 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on how many people want to raise their hands. Then I will go through as many people who want to provide commentary as possible on all of them. And then at some point later this evening, we will go into just an open discussion with whatever is on your mind about the book and the issues discussed there. Now, just a really quick honesty check. Who here read the whole book? Not just parts of it, but the whole book. Thank you, all of you, for your diligence, and thank you, the rest of you, for your honesty. Two further questions. How many people here, just by show of hands, and this is not a judgment thing, this is just for prep so we can get a sense of other people's views coming into this. How many here explicitly consider yourself to be red? Thank you. And then how many here consider yourself, by show of hands, to be blue? Great. We've got a pretty good mix. So this should be a conversation, hopefully as interesting as the Constitutional Convention of 1787 itself. So let's get into this. One of the first questions, put your hands down now. I will ask you to put your hands up when you have a comment response or a question for the rest of the group, perhaps. So the first question we will go with, I think this one's interesting and relevant here. The Constitution is basically a framework for people who disagree to nevertheless work together for the common good. But when the people who disagree do not want to work together, the situation we have now, but instead they want to win regardless of the cost to the nation, how can the Constitution still do its job? Please raise your hand if you have a thought on that. How can the Constitution work when we are so polarized we don't want to work with the other side?
Raise your Zoom hand if you would like to address that.
Steve?
Let's hear from Mark and then from Steve. Mark, unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks. How can it work? Well, my thought about this is that's all that people could do in the past, and that's in the past when it did work, it did limit people who, it didn't matter that people didn't want to work with the other side. They still couldn't do anything unless there was agreement. And still that's true. So only acting on what they shared agreement about is the purpose of the Constitution. It's not supposed to work to get people to do something if there's not agreement. I mean, that's not the design, that's my impression.
Thank you, Mark. Steve, would you like to share?
Unmute yourself, please.
Steve, you are on mute.
Unmuted now? Sorry about that.
Yeah, we're good.
I forgive you.
My answer to your question would be that I think, first and foremost, I think congressmen and the president and all their staff should read the Constitution. That would be a help. Two, I think they should focus more on what Levin calls the federal domain versus the rest of the domain. I'm a strong believer in the enumerated powers and what it says. I read that every time a bill passes Congress, go back and read the enumerated powers, and I just shake my head is what some of the things that are being passed. And the third thing I would say, how the Constitution, we've got some rules in the House and the Senate about majority and how we go about voting for rules. I would love to see the 60% supermajority rule applied to the House as well as the Senate. I think that would absolutely force more conversation and dialogue and deliberation between the two. And I'd love to see the president veto any law that doesn't have 60% majority rule in Senate and House. I'm a little rabid about that, but that's my opinion.
Political rabies is not a bad thing, so thank you for sharing that. James, would you like to share? James, you are still on mute. James, you are still on mute. James, you keep unmuting and then it mutes again.
Okay,
There you go.
there we go. I think that's probably one of the most important questions that the book raises is how do you take a society such as we are right now, where winning is the only object and pushing one's views through is the most important thing. And how you fix that, I don't have a ready answer for. I mean, I think it would be helpful if there were some genuine teeth in the constitutional prescriptions regarding the powers of various branches and the incumbent actors in them, what they can and cannot do. But that would require agreement among the various actors to abide by those rules. And I don't know that we have anything close to that at the current juncture. Years ago, I used to lecture people about the Texas Constitution and how it was an utter disaster, and that we should change it. But the problem is when people would ask me, well, how would you change it? The answer is you can't, because there are stakeholders who have vested interests in maintaining the status quo. And that's the problem that we're going to have with the US Constitution. As long as there's somebody who's winning or thinks they're winning, they're not going to agree to give up power. It's just not how people operate. So how we do this, how we convince them to people to go back and agree to be bound by the restrictions the Constitution imposes is the $64 billion question.
Thanks, James. And on the note of one of the things you said about the Texas state constitution entrenching some interests in power, I think over the rest of this conversation, I would be curious in what people think about, does the US Constitution entrench some interests in power and make political change difficult? So, by the way, James, please let your cat know that we all say hello. We saw him wander there, and we're interested in his thoughts on the Constitution too. William, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, I'm anonymous also in terms of picture. I think we forget that we're a republic and not a democracy. And were we to try and form a constitution today based upon 50 colonies, we would not get anywhere. That the original colonies, it was a compromise to get us to where we are today with the current constitution. And it was never intended that somebody wins and everybody else loses. It was an understanding at the time that even in those original 13 colonies, there were more urban colonies than not. It was rural versus city. And there was a need to get to a consensus, and the Constitution was written that way, and we have forgotten about it. And if you recall in Federalist 9, the warning against factions, we become too factionated, if you will, where to win, someone has to lose as opposed to forced into some kind of compromising situation. We talk about the original Constitution. I didn't realize until recently, and this gets into the big issue of the educational part, the Bill of Rights did not apply at the state level until the 14th Amendment and the incorporation doctrine. So you had limitations on speech and arms up until the 14th Amendment, and it wasn't until the Supreme Court started enforcing that in the early 1900s that it became what we think it is today, that was not in fact there at the time the country was formed. So I think people have to take a step back and understand how we formed our country in its earlier stages. It was never intended to be a constitution of somebody wins and everybody else loses. And that's where we've gone off the rails.
William, thank you for your perspective. I will note very briefly that I believe Federalist 9 was about foreign policy unification, and that the one about factions was Federalist number 10. But let's discuss in the comments real quick.
We might be in different books.
That's possibly true, and that is a question of interpretation.
So my book has it as 9, but that's neither here nor there.
We will discuss. We will discuss. Everybody, we're going to move on to one related question that I think those of you who have comments on this one may be able to transfer your comments there. So real quick, the next question we'll go to is, Yuval Levin makes clear that the framers of the Constitution intended Congress to be a body whose members worked and negotiated together for the common good, rather than one in which the majority simply imposed its will. How can that old idea be made our legislators' goal again? And I'm curious, both in the relations of the last question and to this one. Dennis, please go. Dennis?
I think Dennis may have.
Dennis, you are on mute. Do not worry. This
Okay,
is-
now I'm ready. Okay, sorry about that. One of the
Absolutely.
things that was not really said out loud at the time when they gathered to write the Constitution was that George Washington and a couple others specifically waited until Thomas Paine was out of the country. He was over in France, and they organized the the gathering to do that, because to the question that Luke just asked, their sense was, and Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, certainly a key part of firing up everybody for the revolution, for Revolutionary War and the need to separate from the British. But he's was very much of that kind of a mindset of, and we got to shove down their throat, and we're going to be the ones in charge, etc. But the fact that they saw where his strengths, but also where it wasn't contributing, and the fact that they waited till he was out of country to hold the convention tells you a little bit. And I think that's a kind of a signal for that mindset that was important 200 plus years ago that should be important 200 now. And you're right, I don't know how to, practically speaking, how to do that in 2025 and beyond right off the top of my head. But again, just they saw it and said Thomas Paine wasn't going to help, and today's equivalent of Thomas Paine would not help.
I will say it seems that there are a few more folks like Thomas Paine nowadays than folks like George Washington, but that perhaps can be a discussion in its own right. Let's go to Atul. Atul, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, you did, and thank you for the opportunity. To be frank, I did not read that book. I didn't get a chance. But I can follow the discussion because I am really, I read a lot of history and how consumers form and what were the original framers and how the whole compromise happened. As someone has mentioned that it was only 13 colony, and a lot of compromise happened between North and South to make a constitution, to make a union, because they were not agreeing, and a lot of big states, especially in New York, was not part of that entire thing, and they were almost 10th or 11th state to ratify it. So there are definitely a lot of issues over there, and the same issues I see it today. The question which was I would like to answer, that the framers, especially Washington and others, elders at that time, they never thought that there will be a party system. And the biggest problem I think we have currently is the grip of these two parties on our political process. And if we want to remove that, we need to do like what Bravest Angels are doing, and see that we need to remove this grip on power from the municipal, like at the local level to the federal level. This two-party system creates all the problem, because then you are in it to win it. Or because if we have people from no party, majority will vote, and that's fine. It will not be a whip, there will not be a leadership, there will not be a type of I would say corruption and compromise happens because of the party. And I would definitely love to see other people view on that, how and what we can do at grassroots level to remove these two parties from the power at every level and every decision in our society.
Thank you. And the question of parties is a fascinating one. I'd be curious other people's thoughts over this. Len, going to the ideas of how to go back to that compromising idea, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a little confused by the whole framing in the book. I mean, I like the Constitution, but I don't think just going back to the Constitution will make us less polarized. I think polarization is a problem in itself, and perhaps to the extent that we're violating the Constitution, it's because of the polarization. So the Congress can't agree, for instance, on bills because of party factionalism, and so the presidency takes on a stronger role. So it's not clear to me that that that's violating the Constitution, but I don't know there's anything in the Constitution per se that's against polarization. It might be, the spirit, writings in the Federalist Papers, the intent was to not be polarized, to compromise. But the Constitution as written, I'm not sure it really, prescribes compromise. And I think there are other factors in our society that are causing the polarization, which in turn is causing, in some cases, violation, disrespect for the Constitution. Throwing out that out there.
Len, that's a really interesting and important distinction. Thank you for sharing that. Also, always good to see you. I look forward to running into you around here in DC soon.
Okay.
Let's go to one last answer on this and then move to a third question after that so we can go back down to the citizenship level. But Ben, what do you think about how to move back to a compromise understanding?
Well, after listening to Len, I have to counter where he's coming from. I believe that the premise of the book is the key to understanding a government of compromise. 13 colonies could not independently operate, and they found that out very, very quickly. No one colony was capable of being its own economy. They had to interface. They had to interface with overseas economies. Rural states were able to grow the food, and somebody else made the machines to go out and plow the fields. Compromise. So a constitutional convention came together and said, all right, all you 13 states who do not intend to give one piece of your power up now have to come together, and we will create this compromise. Happens to be the Constitution, which was nothing but a compromise. We have today rules. As an example, the Constitution of the United States requires a budget be made. Now, the side rules, the games between the parties, have allowed for way too many years now the necessary to the Constitution budget to be sidestepped. They don't even attempt anymore to make us think they're trying to make an annual budget. Why? Because a budget requires a budget. We have so much coming in, we have so much going out, and what do we do about the difference? So they've avoided that conversation. And we, the people, have the responsibility to be arguing with it. If someone has not signed on a bill or made a comment in their 8 years serving in Congress, I think we need to kick them out because they're not doing the job, and they hide there very well. Okay, people who are active have to be in compromise. People who have opinions and bring those opinions to the floor of, let's use the House, but the Senate the same way. Say, okay, I have an idea. Everyone make comment. Fine. Eventually, if that idea progresses, a compromise has been reached. If the idea dies, another compromise has been reached. The compromise being that wasn't a great idea. For the backbenchers, as they were called both in England and in Rome, for the backbenchers to sit there for the whole term in office and not make comment means nothing happens.
Thank you, Ben. I forgot to turn backbenchers, and I appreciate you bringing it back into this conversation. We're going to go into one last question before we open this up to general commentaries. And this one I think is interesting, given that we are one of these such institutions. The role of mediating institutions. Yuval Levin highlights the critical role of mediating institutions such as churches, civic organizations, and political parties, and braver angels. In bridging the divide between individuals and government, these institutions cultivate civic virtue, facilitate compromise, and provide a sense of belonging. Their decline, Levin argues, contributes significantly to modern political dysfunction. What role should mediating institutions play in strengthening democracy, and how can their decline be reversed? Please raise your hand if you have thoughts. This is a direct question about how do you build civil society and what role do they have in the Constitution. Len, you have done some important, interesting stuff on rural-urban versions of this. What do you think?
Well, thanks. Well, yeah, I think the civil society may be key. Institutions like Braver Angels, from a bottom-up approach, could get people to put pressure on their elected representatives, or even change them directly through our Braver Politics program. There's the plug for that, and so create greater compromise in that way. Encourage our legislators to compromise, and they'll accomplish more, and then maybe the federal government won't take on as much. Who knows? Maybe, federal government, the executive branch, in other words, will get perhaps revamped soon, for better or worse, but maybe it'll become less powerful, maybe more powerful, depending on your point of view. So that's about, I think civil society is very important.
Thank you, Len. Mac, let's go to you.
Yeah, you mentioned mediating institutions. I hadn't really thought about that term. Used the examples of churches and other things. There's been a pendulum swing from early 1900s. We were very polarized societies and didn't have a lot of civil institutions through the 1950s, 60s. There was a lot of community built. There were churches, unions met as much for community as anything else, veterans organizations, whatever. And those institutions have declining membership and declining participation these days. And perhaps that contributes to a polarized society, that people aren't out there in communion with each other in not getting together. Having said that, it seems like some of these mediating institutions are polarizing in their own right. Certainly the more evangelical churches seem to have strong opinions and seem like they wind up their members. I think there's strong progressive groups that fan up the left and want to hold their politicians to the line, and both the far left and the far right don't like to see their politicians making compromise. So I think part of your question about mediating institutions is there's fewer of them and fewer people participating in them. And perhaps if they're having more discussions, such as Braver Angels has, they would be moderating institutions. Along with Braver Angels, I've been keeping my eye on No Labels, and they're trying to provide support for independent politicians, and in particular, make sure there's a base of support for legislators actually come in and compromise. So that may be a factor that changes things over time. Any rate, thanks.
Thank you for that. Let's go real quick to Lynn. Lynn, thanks for being here and helping. Lynn? Lynn, you just went back on mute. And now you're on mute again. And now you are on mute again. Now we can hear you.
Got it. Okay, and I only had 2 words, civics classes. And I don't know if education is included in this group of moderating institutions, but that would really be, I think, something hugely important for people to come up understanding the concept of the roles of the different parts of government.
That is a good point and a good question and something to think about. Thank you for that. Let's go to Dennis real quick. Dennis, you are still on.
I think a very simple thing that I can say when discussions come up is to say, you know what I did? Back in January of 2025, I started to occasionally read the preamble to the Constitution, and I would sit down and I actually read the entire Declaration of Independence. And I didn't just do that once, I did it about once a week for a while, and it changed my perspective on stuff, you know, and be a leader and start doing little things like that. I think that's practically speaking kind of something maybe that we could do. Something I could do.
And it sounds like it's something that all of us could do too. So thank you for that perspective. Let's go to 2 final comments on this before we open it to a general thoughts on everything. And when we get to the general thoughts, what Dennis just said and what I think a couple other people have implied about what individual citizens can do in the constitutional order, I would be really curious in what all of you, particularly those who haven't spoken yet, think about the individual level too. So let's go first to James. James?
Okay, I'm off. I think I'm back. Hear me?
We can hear you just loud and clear.
Okay, a couple things apropos of Atul's comments about the parties. And the problem with parties is they're sort of baked into the structure of our system, and there's almost no way to get rid of it. And I taught political science to undergraduates at universities for about 30 years. And one of the things that we would go through all the time is basically, you know, why can't we get parties to behave themselves? And the answer is they don't have to. They're basically they're baked into the system. So that's difficult. There's another book that I would encourage people to read at some point by Robert Putnam titled Bowling Alone. When I first got to UTRGV or UTPA years ago, I helped coach a U.S. Constitution team with the McAllen Independent School District. And they competed in UIL competitions nationwide. And that was always one of the themes, was the Putnam book. And it's something that we would all do well to, I think, at least have a look at. This probably may come up better later, but I'll try to shut up after this. And that is my big quibble with Levin's book is that he equates the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and they are not equitable. They are not even compatible with each other. The Declaration is an exhortation to revolt. It is essentially a statement of the duty to revolt under certain conditions. And the Constitution is designed to stop revolts and to prevent them from happening and to make them simply untenable. And so the 2 things are very, very different in terms of their language, in terms of their intention, and so forth. And last of all, there is a very good piece I would commend to everybody. It's by a judge named Learned Hand. He's probably the most famous judge you've never heard of. He wrote a piece called The Spirit of Liberty. He actually gave a speech called The Spirit of Liberty back in the 1940s. And in that speech, Ian goes through what we're facing today. And to give you a Reader's Digest condensed version, his statement is that the spirit of liberty lies in the hearts and minds of men and women of the country. When it dies there, no constitution can save it. When it dies there, no constitution can even begin to save it. And so that, I think, is what we face. And it's basically an uphill battle. So.
Thank you, James. You should also talk to Abraham Lincoln about the compatibility of the Declaration and the Constitution. I don't know my opinion about that. I know Lincoln does. So let's go to a final comment by Atul, and we will then go to open comments. Atul?
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
And I was just, before coming to the institutions, I just wanted to go back, like some people said that there is more polarization right now, we feel, than previously. But in my mind, that was always there from the day this country was formed, because there were Whigs and there were Republicans, there were Federalists, there was always people who were loyalist and revolutionaries. So, and just after that, there were like pamphlet wars were happening. They were smearing each other, from Alexander Hamilton to the Burt and the Thomas Jefferson. Everyone was smearing each other. Think about the polarization what we have in 1860 when Civil War happened. Like that is like we went to war based on polarization. So it's not that polarization is new. When Vietnam War happened, then again country was divided. When civil rights movement was happening, country was divided, and it was always divided every year. I think, like if I read history, there was no time when country was not polarized exactly the same time, like the way we are having right now. And I don't feel there's a difference. From the institution point of view, the one difference I see, especially from my historical context, is that the power of money has grown and power of people has shrunk. So like in churches or in the union or with those kind of institutions, which we are calling the civic society, the participation of the grassroots level has definitely decreased as compared to money they rake in. And that's like only one, like think about that. Like Elon Musk can give $350 million or $40 million for an election. And then what type of agenda that will set. So power of money has definitely increased, and that definitely has created a lot of not having balance because of that, and especially the Supreme Court judgment has one role also to play with Citizen versus United. Thank you.
Atul, thank you for the perspective on past polarization. I'd like to follow up with you on that at some point. We have time for about 3 brief open comments. So if anybody has a burning desire to share any thoughts about anything discussed here or related to the subject, now is your time to speak. Bob Sigafus, did I pronounce your name right?
Sigafus, that's fine. I'm used to pronouncing it wrong myself sometimes. I'm coming at this from a couple different perspectives. I'm a Red from Minnesota. For the last 2 years, I've been trying to find ways to attract more Reds to Braver Angels, and it's been a real challenge. And what I've come up with is, I think citizenship is more important to Reds than relationships. So I think Braver Angels needs to put more focus on citizenship, which means also understanding the Constitution. So I'm actually started a team to try to create discussion topics that any alliance can use to talk about citizenship related issues and more. Barbara is on that team with me. She actually recommended this book to me, and I'm so glad she did, because I changed my whole plan and I actually added 10 discussions that are just based on this book. basically every chapter in this book, I want to create a discuss the content for a discussion topic that everybody in Braver Angels can have an opportunity to look at. I view this as the Braver Angels form of civics education. All of us adults need this civics education too. So that's one of the things. The other thing I come at this from, I spent 40 years in county government service in Minnesota. My dad spent 40 years in county government. Between the two of us, we had 65 years of government service, seeing how the federal government impacted state and local governments. And one of the things my dad said this 50 years ago is that citizens are stepping away more and more from their role in government. They're relying upon the elites to tell them what to do. And until we get us citizens involved again, we're not going to solve the problems in this country.
Bob, thank you for that, and good luck on that project. That is something we really need, and I'm interested in hearing more. Melinda.
Thank you. I think you let me jump the line. I'm Melinda. I'm calling from California, in a blue state and a red county. And one of the things I thought was interesting is the demographics of the group. Is that I've noticed I'm probably one of the younger people, and I think we really struggle in our society to have young people involved, but educated involvement, not just, kind of slung into some, trendy thing that's going on in the, oh, let's stand and march for this. I think it's really important we get young people to be engaged. And I could tell you, I had this really horrible experience with one of my staff where somehow we were talking about Vladimir Putin. And this was several years ago, like 7 years ago. And I explained who Vladimir Putin was. They didn't know. And this person was a political science major at a UC, University of California University. A good one is that. And I said, well, you know who Stalin is? And she says, didn't we fight him in a war? And I was just alarmed because I thought, my God, I was a science major and I could tell you Stalin was from Georgia and not the state. So anyhow, I would love if maybe we could work on reaching out to universities to engage them in some of these discussions where we work with different departments, because I think they would benefit also from the generational differences and experiences, because I think a lot of, people don't know history, and that's such an essential thing in talking about civics and our government. So just an idea, and if I could try, I will do my best to bring the out in my university town. But thank you guys all. I haven't said much because I found out about this a week ago, and I'm in 5 book clubs. I just couldn't get this book down in time, but I will read it. So thank you.
Melinda, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the cult. We always need more people who are everybody who knows this stuff. So I'm sorry that I can't get to all of you. I want to end this on the note of young people, as Melinda just brought up. So I just saw, where are you? Mary, you had your hand up. Would you like to close us out with your share?
I just wanted to point out that I'm not really sure exactly how old that person who just spoke for me was. Melinda. Okay, yeah. But I am probably the youngest person here, and I'm 22. So, and yes, I agree. There does need to be so much more in the way of history class and younger people, because the sheer number of people, I'm a history nerd, mostly because the history that was taught me in high school was so biased that when I got out of high school, I'm like, I'm just re-educating myself. Because it's okay, I had a weird upbringing. But yes, I read all these books and I'm just like, okay. And then I look at other kids in university and everything, and it's just sort of like, okay, okay.
Well, Mary, we will hear from you sometime soon. But on that happy note of civics, history, and the future, I would like to turn it back to Leigh and Barbara. Thank you for everybody who shared.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke. Thank everyone who's participated in the conversation and those of you listening. We are concluding our discussion of American Covenant, but we're not quite done. Connecting braver angels with each other and spreading the message of depolarization through person-to-person contact is an important part of our mission. During the meeting, you may have felt inspired to connect with other participants. You may have been struck by something someone said, noticed someone who lives near you, or found some sort of shared common interest. We give you an opportunity now to make that connection. For the next few minutes, the chat window will remain open. If you wish, this is completely your choice, you may type your name and email address into the chat window and any special interest or request to follow up about something you heard. You can reach out to an individual participant. After the meeting, the information that you type in the chat window during this time will be emailed to all participants. And any further communication between participants will be up to individual initiative, and we is expected to follow Braver Angels ground rules of respectful conversation. Now, we're also putting our library contact information in the chat, and we invite you to let us know if you're interested in the kind of efforts we do. And in general, if you would like to know more about events at Braver Angels, please browse the calendar listing on our website. And there are many workshops, debates, videos, podcasts, and of course, book club discussions. So we'd like to see you at a future book club discussion. So we encourage you to join Braver Angels and become engaged with your local Braver Angels Alliance. We are a citizen-led grassroots organization, an organization of volunteers. And together we can bring about the flourishing of civil society. That concludes our meeting tonight. We've had a great and wide-ranging discussion. A link to the video recording will be available to you on our website in a day or two from now. And we thank all of you for attending and hope to see you again.